There we are. So this session is now being recorded, just so you're aware. So I just wanted to say a quick sort of intro really to this, which is that we know from research that we've done that financial literacy, although it's been on the school national curriculum since 2014, still is causing concern for particularly young professionals. So moving out of student life and into professional life and having questions around money matters, that's really causing some sort of nervousness and anxiety around what to do. You know, there are all sorts of schemes that you see on social media about get rich quick, and you know, obviously not wanting anyone to fall foul of those sorts of campaigns that are plastered all over social media. And that actually all of these worries and concerns are not really knowing about some of the important financial life management matters is causing you know, people going into work quite a lot of stress and anxiety, and is having an impact on young people's mental health. So for all of these reasons, we wanted to put something together for our students. 85% of young professionals feel that they would like to have been taught more about financial matters and money matters. And so we've got a series of talks, and I'm really delighted to be joined today by Paul Welsh and a team of his colleagues from the Financial Planning Corporation, who are going to talk to you today about things such as how saving and investing and tax planning and debt, or hopefully debt avoidance, but also what not to do, you know, around some of these sort of scams, quick wins as far as investments are concerned for people who are young or perhaps novice investors. Some sort of things to look out for. So there's this talk, there's another one next week, and we're really pleased to have Paul and his team also doing some one-to-ones. If you have some very specific questions you'd like to meet on a one-to-one basis with a financial planner, then there are those. All the sessions next week seem to be booked up, so I'm really pleased that everyone's engaged with that. So that's brilliant news, and clearly indicates that this is something that you want to know a lot more about. So that's why we're doing it, and that's why we've partnered with the Financial Planning Corporation. And I'm now going to hand over to Paul, who's going to run through this talk with you and with his colleagues.
Okay, thanks, Jane. Thanks, Jane. Just bear with us a second. I'll just bring up the presentation. Just going to share my screen. Give me a sec. Okay, thanks. Yeah, thanks, Jane, and thanks for inviting us to speak. It's a pleasure to be here, even if it is just virtually. I would like to start just by introducing both myself and my colleagues and talking a little bit about what we do. My name is Paul Welsh. I'm a senior advisor at the Financial Planning Corporation. We are a firm of chartered financial planners based in the Northwest, and we provide personal financial planning and investment advice to business owners and professionals from all over the UK, helping them to achieve and maintain financial independence. So the purpose of today's session is to cover some of the first principles of financial management, which you will hopefully find useful as you journey through your career and look to build your own personal wealth. I'm joined today by my colleagues Helen Thomas, Stephen Caffrey and Will Carter, all of whom are chartered financial planners at FPC, and we'll be looking at 4 areas in particular: debt, protection, savings and investment, and tax planning. We hope today's sessions will provide you with 3 key takeaways from each of those 4 areas, and that your future selves will thank you for acting on those. We'll have some time at the end of the session to answer any questions that you may have. Please feel free to post them in the chat box as we go along. First of all, Stephen is going to talk to you about debt.
Cheers, Paul. Hello, all. Okay. So today I want to talk to you about personal debt. Now, there are too many forms of debt to go through today, and most of them you will have already come across. Now, debt is something that all of us will encounter in our lives, and not all debt is bad. For instance, most mortgages are considered a good form of debt, as most young people dream of gaining independence from living with their parents, but they cannot afford to buy a house outright. There are also bad forms of debt, which tend to be short-term with high interest rates. I'm talking such things as overdrafts and payday loans. Now, debt can often wrongly be perceived as something only foolish people get into. However, many people in the UK live from paycheck to paycheck. The Office of National Statistics findings show that around 40% of people aged 22 to 29 have no savings, whilst 10% have around £2,000 to £3,000 and only 25% have over £6,000. Therefore, all it takes is losing your job for a few months or a broken down car for you to get started into the debt spiral. So today, I just want to share a few insights that may help you in the future. Now, first, for a bit of context, I'd like to talk to you about the UK's current relationship with personal debt. People in the UK owe around £1,742 billion worth of debt, which is expected to grow to £2,354 billion by the end of 2025. The average debt per household, including mortgages, £62,000. Per adult, this equates to around £33,000 or 110% of average earnings. So debt is something we seem to love here in the UK, as it's clearly something that's growing. Now, I just want to take you back a few steps and revisit the fundamentals of debt. So debt is money borrowed from one party to another. The most common forms of debt are loans, mortgages, and credit cards. When you borrow money, you will pay back the original amount. We call this the capital plus the interest. The interest provides the lender with compensation for bearing the risk. And interest is usually defined as APR, which is the annual percent rate, telling you the total cost of borrowing. Secured versus unsecured. So there's two different types of debt, the secured and unsecured. Secured debt is collateral backed. So for example, if you fail to make your mortgage payments, the provider can repossess your home. Unsecured is not collateral backed. For example, credit cards, which interest rate is primarily determined on your credit score. Secured debt most often afford you a better interest rate. Now, focusing on the interest element, there are two most popular forms of interest, which are single and compound. Simple interest is a fixed percentage of the original sum borrowed year on year, and compound interest is interest added to interest. Here you will see the difference between simple versus compound on a £10,000 loan over 10 years with a 10% interest rate. This is assuming you don't pay back the loan early. Now, as you can see, you will pay more interest using the compound method. Compound interest is used by most lenders, including for credit cards and payday lenders. Now, credit cards in the UK currently have a rate of around 30% APR, while some payday loan lenders have a rate of around 766%. So when compared to the 10% shown in the graph, it shows you just how easy it is for the debt to get out of hand if the interest is left to accumulate and compound. So next, I want to talk to you about what factors determine the level of interest charged. So these are secured versus unsecured, which I spoke about earlier. Another big one is the credit score. Now, a person's credit score is a numerical value of an individual's credit worthiness. The better your score, the more likely you are to obtain a higher amount of credit at the best interest rates. So if you pay your debts on time and do not miss any payments, you will likely have a better credit score. Strangely, people who have debt but make the payments on time can have a better credit score than people who have absolutely no debt. This is because it shows the individual with debt has a track record of paying what they owe on time, whilst the person with no debt has no track history, therefore is more of an unknown. You can check your credit score by signing up to companies like Experian. Experian can help you review your score, suggest changes to improve it, and also allows you to check if there are any errors in the report that might have a negative effect on it. Now, credit scores may not be important to you at this time, but being responsible now will ensure you have access to the best terms in the future. Now, another thing that affects the interest rates of the bank is the Bank of England base rate. And this is the rate it charges banks to borrow money, which currently in the UK is about 0.1%. It influences what rate of interest banks pass on to consumers for mortgages, loans, and credit, other forms of credit. Now, lower rates mean people spend and borrow more, while higher rates have the opposite effect. meaning people save more. Now, the last thing I want to talk to you about is student loans, which I imagine will apply to the majority of you. When I went to university, I never really understood the terms loan, as it was sold to me as a cheap form of borrowing that I wouldn't even notice coming out my first paycheck. Long and behold, it was only after my first paycheck I recognised the significance of the repayment terms. So first of all, I just want to run you through the repayment terms for Plan 2, and I want to talk to you about whether it's making voluntary contributions. Now, currently, when you go into the world of work, there's a 9% levy on income above the threshold income of £27,000. The threshold income increases each year, usually in line with the National Average Weekly Earnings Index, which monitors short-term changes in people's wages. And the interest rate is based on the Retail Price Index, which is a measure of inflation which monitors the price of a sample of goods and services here in the UK. Last year, it was around 2.6%. Then it's plus 0 to 3% based on your salary. And you can see the little table there, that's how it works. So if a student earned above £49,000 last year, you would have had an interest rate of 5.6%. Now, a lot of people find these current rules are a bit morally unfair, especially when the Bank of England base rate currently sits at 0.1%. Although on credit to student loans, not every debt is wiped after 30 years. Now, a debt trap you can easily fall into is paying back some of your student loan debt by making regular or one-off voluntary contributions. So I just want to talk you through student A and student B's 30-year relationship with student debt. Now, student A and B leave university in the same year on the same terms with the same amount of debt, around £55,000, and they both enjoy a 5% salary increase for the rest of their lives. Now, student A earns a starting salary of £40,000, while student B earns a starting salary of £25,000. Now, student A, the result of this is student A pays back £133,000 worth of loan over 30 years, but at this point, they still have £24,000 worth of debt, which gets wiped. Conversely, student B pays back just £44,000 over the 30 years, and they have £152,000 worth of debt wiped off. So now I just want to explain the impact of making voluntary contributions. So both student A and student B decide to make additional voluntary contributions of £100 a month or £1,200 a year. Let's say they have that spare. Now, student A pays back his debt after 25 years, and he ends up saving £22,500 in the process. Student B, on the other hand, still doesn't pay back the debt, but it has cost them an extra £36,000, meaning their good intentions of trying to pay back the debt early have had no impact, well, in fact, a negative impact. However, I want to stress using money to pay off student loans is not a priority for most students. This is because they will likely have other things they will need the money for, such as buying the first home, going on holidays, having kids, buying a car. So paying off your loan is very low on the list of priorities. So in conclusion, student debt is not as cheap as advertised, and making voluntary contributions will likely not be worth it unless you are a top earner and you've ticked off most of life's goals and you paid off the majority of your other debts. But for average earners, it's likely not worth it for a debt that gets wiped in 30 years. So the last thing I just want to share with you today is my debt takeaways. So my first one is beware compound interest. It's easier than you think to get caught in debt spiral. So try not to overexpose yourself to debt, especially short-term bad debt where possible. The other takeaway is do your maths. Before making any decision on entering into a new credit agreement, shop around for the best rates. And if you are thinking about making voluntary contributions towards your student loan, complete the necessary calculations. Sites like Money Saving Experts have online calculators to help you do this. And my last one, but most important one, is take debt seriously. So even by missing a few payments on a mobile contract or a gym membership, maybe when you're a bit younger, can be the difference between getting the mortgage amount for your dream home or obtaining a loan with a workable interest rate to fund a business idea. Yeah, they're my debt takeaways. Next, I just want to introduce you to my colleague, Will. Over to you, Will.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Will Carter, and I'm one of the Chartered Financial Planners here at FPC. And I'm going to speak to you about financial protection today. So I think when most people think about financial advice, they probably think about investing in stocks and shares, maybe about the FTSE 100, or things like Bitcoin or pensions. Now, as a firm of financial planners, we also think financial protection is also a really important part of financial advice. So you might be thinking, what is financial protection? Why is this relevant to me at this stage of my career? Maybe before you start your training contract, how can financial protection products help me specifically? And we're going to cover all those points in the next few minutes. Okay, so what is financial protection? Well, financial protection is the use of insurance to protect against a risk. We're paying an insurance company regular payments each month, and we're hoping that they are then going to pay out an amount of money if that risky event takes place. So why should you care about that right now? Well, what we want to do here is look at the gap between what your firm may provide you with as an employment benefit and what you may need or may like to have as additional insurance cover. Hopefully, this is also going to help you out if you're in a tough situation in the future. It's certainly worth thinking about and keeping in mind, in addition to thinking about investing or about pensions or tax. Okay, so let's look at an overview of what we're going to cover today. Today, we're going to focus on 4 types of policy: accident, sickness, and unemployment, private medical insurance, permanent health insurance, and critical illness cover. Now, there are many other different types of insurance policy. These are probably the most relevant for you at this stage of your life and your careers. Okay, so let's look at accident, sickness, and unemployment cover. So these are short-term policies, and they're going to cover you if you lose your job through no fault of your own. They're going to pay out a tax-free income for a limited amount of time. It's usually around 12 months, but sometimes up to 2 years. It really does depend on the type of policy you have and what the insurer will offer you. Okay, so what do we need to think about with these kind of policies? Well, you're probably going to have a sick pay scheme at work. You're certainly going to be entitled to statutory sick pay, but these policies could be useful if you're made redundant by your employer and you have to look for another job. We would always encourage you to try to hold an emergency cash reserve so you can cover your bills and payments if you're out of work for a short period of time. Okay, so the next policy is private medical insurance. Now, these policies are going to help to pay for private medical care if you don't want to use the NHS. So this is quite topical at the moment, as we all know about NHS waiting lists. These policies are going to cover short-term conditions, pay for things like initial tests, and so they're not too useful for things like longer-term illness, but they also may pay for things like private accommodation and maybe medicines that are not available on the NHS. Okay, so what do we need to consider when we think about private medical cover? Well, it may be that the NHS is perfectly adequate for your needs and you don't feel the need to pay for private treatment. Generally, these types of policies are not going to cover pre-existing conditions, but they could be quicker than the NHS. These policies are going to give you some choice and different options, and so it may give you some peace of mind in a difficult situation. Okay, so finally, we're going to look at permanent health insurance, which is also known as income protection and also critical illness cover. So permanent health insurance is going to pay out a tax-free income if you're sick and can't work. This isn't going to be your full salary, but usually around 60% to 75%. This is until you go back to work or you retire, so it could pay out for a very long time. Critical illness cover is going to pay out a lump sum, not an income, if you're diagnosed with a serious or terminal illness. Okay, so what do we need to think about with these types of policies? So with permanent health insurance, the only factor here is if you can work or not. With critical illness cover, there is a list of illnesses that will be covered by the insurer. Now, both of these policies can be quite expensive. It's not always possible to have both of these at the same time. Now, you're actually more likely to suffer illness or disability than you are to die. So having some kind of protection here does kind of make sense. You may also have existing income protection cover at work. Then again, you may not. And this would probably stop anyway if you were to leave your firm. Okay, so what are the key takeaways from this presentation? Well, I'd like you to think about what your firm will offer you, what gaps you may have, and what options are available to you in terms of insurance products. Now, it would be great to be completely covered, but it is about affordability and prioritizing what you think is important. In terms of cost, insurance cover tends to be really quite cheap in your 20s, assuming you're in good health, and then gets more expensive as you get older. Now, it may be at this stage that paying off a credit card debt or saving up for a house deposit takes priority. But when you get to the point where you are buying a property, it's going to be useful to look at things like life cover, as life insurance can be linked to an outstanding mortgage. Taking professional advice on this is probably going to be a good idea. Okay, thank you for your time today, guys. And now I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Paul Welsh, who is going to speak about savings and investments.
Thanks, Will. As Will said, I'm just going to be talking about savings and investments. When we hear the word investment, certain images may come to mind. That could be the traditional trading floors of Wall Street or the London Stock Exchange, or even the rather outrageous behaviour of the likes of Jordan Belfort. Throughout recent history, there have been loads of stories of easy investment returns, tales of fortunes to be made overnight. In recent times, the more extreme messages tend to be that we can make enough money to retire, or that we can make a living from trading for just a few hours a day. Ultimately, these stories tap into some of our base emotions. It tends to feel exciting to talk about investments and large returns. And an emotion we've all felt is the fear of missing out, the sense that some smart people are taking advantage of an opportunity that we are overlooking, and that one simple action could have a profound impact on us financially. There are certain investment stories that have persisted over the last few years, for example, Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, and then some that have hit the headlines for a period. The GameStop saga is the most obvious recent example. These stories tend to have the same theme, one of being able to get rich fairly quickly and easily. It may be tempting to think that huge gains can be made from a single shrewd investment, but I guarantee that is mostly down to luck rather than skill. For most people, all they're really doing is taking risks that they usually can't afford to take. I'm going to use a real life example to highlight the risks involved. At the height of the GameStop saga, when some amateur investors from the Reddit forum attempted to inflict some financial pain on hedge fund managers, a client called me saying that he had a spare £50,000 and was considering investing in the stock, and he wanted to know my thoughts. Now, at the time, the share price had risen from around $20 to an astronomical $347. He had that FOMO and he wanted a piece of the action. Within a couple of weeks, the GameStop share price was down 85% from its peak. At that point, our client would have turned his £50,000 into £10,000. I think this illustrates just how risky some of these trades can be and how quickly things can go wrong. The share price has bounced back to a range of between $150 and $210, a price unsupported by the company financials, I might add, but our client would still be looking at a £20,000 loss on his original £50,000 investment. Thankfully, I had convinced him to put the pin back in that particular grenade, and he didn't invest. This is an extreme example of how the price of individual investments can fluctuate wildly, but it happens frequently, and sometimes it is not so easy to spot ahead of time. And just to show you how the price of Bitcoin has fluctuated, this is a chart showing its price over the last 5 years. It went from a high of $61,000 in March, but lost nearly half of its value in July before bouncing back somewhat. Investing in single volatile assets like Bitcoin or GameStop shares is not really investment at all. It's speculation. Effectively, you are gambling, and you have to be prepared to lose a substantial amount of the money you commit. So when it comes to investing money, how do we avoid the many pitfalls? There's a saying in the investment world, win by not losing. And there are a few basic principles we can follow, which will help us to avoid the mistakes. It's obviously important to budget and live within your means, but before we even consider investing money, it's important that we separate savings from investment. It is good practice to retain an appropriate cash reserve for emergencies. As young professionals, this could be 6 months worth of your basic expenses, plus you should keep aside money for any known one-off expenditure within the next 5 years. So don't invest money that is needed in the short term. It is return of capital, not return on capital, that is the most important consideration here. Short-term investment does not allow enough time to ride out market downturns. Generally speaking, the higher the return, the more risk you need to take in order to achieve that return. And at a certain point along that risk scale, a higher degree of risk doesn't translate into the same increase in return. There are no risk-free investments to be found, but there are plenty of opportunities to take return-free risks. As the saying goes, if something seems too good to be true, it probably is. One of the main ways we can manage risk is through diversification. This is the only free lunch in investment. By spreading your investments across a range of different asset classes with exposure to a wide range of global stock and bond markets, you are spreading the risk you are taking. I mentioned Jordan Belfort earlier, and he was quoted on the BBC in February as saying that trying to decide when to sell shares in a company is basically like trying to catch a falling knife on the way down. You're probably going to get hurt. So don't try to call the top or the bottom of the market. It is time in the market rather than market timing that will have the biggest impact on your investment returns. Inflation has been in the news recently as the global economy emerges from the pandemic and the disruption it caused feeds through to consumer prices. Inflation is a serious threat to wealth. If it's running at 3%, for example, in 10 years' time, £10,000 will be worth just under £7,500 in real terms, losing over a quarter of its value. Inflation is a reason to invest over the long term, to try to preserve the purchasing power of your money in future years. Costs can have a significant impact on investment returns. Some investment fund costs, for example, can be pretty eye-watering. The annual charges on typical investment funds can range from 0.1% per year to as high as 3.5% per year. Add in inflation to the latter, and you've given yourself a high hurdle rate from the outset. My colleague Helen will be covering tax planning in a bit more detail, but avoiding unnecessary tax and using all of the legitimate allowances and reliefs available will also increase overall returns. It is the net of tax and cost return which matters to you. So focus on managing these so you keep as much of the return as possible. Finally, simply having a plan and sticking to it gives you the best chance of yielding favourable results. And talk of discipline leads into something that I've touched upon already and is often overlooked, but which has started to receive more and more attention in investment circles in recent years: the impact our emotions have on the decisions we make. You see, we like to think that we make rational decisions when actually we tend to react emotionally. Despite what we think, we are more Homer Simpson than Spock. Studies have shown that investment returns and an investment portfolio generates naturally are higher than the returns investors typically realise because their own behaviour tends to have a suboptimal impact on their investment portfolio. These behaviours are innate and arise from the primitive part of our brain, and so we are all susceptible, even educated professionals. But following the principles I've just outlined will help us to mitigate those behaviours. Ultimately, investment boils down to managing the risk to your wealth, the risk of running out or losing money, the risk of the personal power of your money being eroded over time, the risk of not achieving what you want to achieve. Warren Buffett is regarded as one of the greatest investors of all time, yet his overall philosophy is really very simple. When he invests, he does so for the long term and doesn't attempt to time markets. He diversifies by buying shares in various different companies, and he holds them for long periods of time. So in summary, focus on the things you can control. Build a cash reserve, invest for the long term, and spread your risk. Good investing is not about making great decisions, it's about consistently not making mistakes. Or in other words, we win by not losing. Okay, so that's all for me. I will hand over to Helen, who's going to talk a little bit about tax.
Thanks, Paul. I'm Helen Thomas. I'm also a chartered financial planner, and I can indeed drive a tractor. So today I'm going to talk to you about what you can do in the area of tax planning that your future self will thank you for. So there are a number of common mistakes that people make when considering tax planning, and it's worth being aware of them. An obvious mistake is that people assume that their payroll and HMRC have got the correct information and are using the correct tax code. This is especially important when starting out in a new job or taking on a second job, because HMRC can use emergency tax codes or basically the entirely wrong tax codes, and you could be overpaying or underpaying tax. The problem is that it can then obviously impact on your cash flow for the month, and if it's an underpayment, then you're going to have to pay that tax back. Ignoring tax allowances is a common mistake, especially amongst first-time investors. So everyone is entitled to certain tax allowances each year, running April to April. A few examples of these include the personal allowance, the pension annual allowance, ISA allowance, and a capital gains tax allowance. Not making use of these allowances will ultimately mean that you're paying more tax than you need to, and will obviously then impact on any investment returns that you make. Last on my list is forgetting that tax laws and legislations can change and actually do pretty frequently. Related to my second point, if you don't use the allowances now, then there's no guarantee that they'll be there in the future. Perfect example is pensions legislation. It's changed so many times as different political parties have been in power. You cannot make anywhere near the level of pension contribution now that you could do 10 years ago, for example. Tax relief on any pension contributions is also likely to change in the future. We just don't know when. So if we move on to concentrate about pensions. So saving for retirement might be low on your agenda right now, especially because retirement seems a long way away. But there are a few things that you should bear in mind that your future self will thank you for. So you might think that you'd prefer to receive all of your income in your pocket and not make pension contributions to start with. However, your employer is also going to be making minimum contributions to your pension too. For example, if you earn $30,000 a year, then you're required to put in 5%, which is $1,500, and your employer has to put in £900 or 3%. It's often actually a lot more, and employers will generally try and match your contributions. By saying no to being auto-enrolled, you're effectively then receiving less benefits to compare with the colleagues that say yes. Obviously, this is exacerbated when you start climbing up the pay scale. You'll be missing out on more pension contributions. There are also different types of pension contributions, and it's worth being aware of them because it can impact you in a few different ways. Sacrificing your salary, for example, for more pension contribution is a fairly common practice and has a lot of advantages. You have less gross income, which is your income before tax, because you've given up some of that income for a pension contribution instead. That means you don't pay as much income tax and you save a bit on national insurance as well. Some employers will give you their national insurance saving into your pension as well. So that's an extra benefit there. However, as with anything, there are drawbacks. So it can impact on how much you can borrow via a loan or a mortgage, because that gross income is less because you're taking more as a pension contribution. So the net income might be the same, but some mortgage lenders do look at the gross income instead. It's also possible to make pension contributions yourself. The benefit of doing this is that you're going to receive tax relief into the pension, and also via your tax return if you're a higher or additional rate taxpayer. This can be done as a standalone thing or in addition to any auto-enrolment or salary sacrifice pension, and can be basically a really good way of reducing your income tax bill. Of course, your employer doesn't need to match any of these additional contributions you make. Pension contributions are ultimately a good and legal way of reducing your income tax bill whilst also saving for future you. So if we look at ISAs then, it might seem obvious, but investing via a non-tax efficient wrapper, which are generally called general investment accounts, before making use of your ISA allowance is a simple mistake, but that many make, especially when you're starting investing. Your ISA allowance is currently $20,000 a year, and if you don't use it this year, then you lose it. We also don't know when the ISA allowance will change. It could go up or it could go down. ISAs are great because for any investor, because interest, dividends, and capital growth are all tax-free. It is also quite important to understand how ISAs work. So there are two main types of ISAs, cash ISAs and stocks and shares ISAs. The $20,000 a year allowance can be split between cash and stocks and shares, and you can transfer one to the other. This means that you can make use of your allowances, but not necessarily invest all of it at the same time. You can also transfer past ISAs, so last year's ISA, to a new ISA for this year. So that means that you can keep on top of them. Lastly, it might be tempting to invest all of your money in an ISA without taking into account any of the money that you need, like things, emergency cash, potentially going on holiday. This can lead to a panic and a sale of your ISA to get that money. The problem is if you have to sell at a depressed market, meaning that you'll get less back than you put in. The solution, of course, is to budget how much you need to have in cash and how much should be invested so that you basically avoid this panic sale. There are, of course, other investments. So I'm going to talk about some other tax allowances. So joining tax avoidance schemes can be very tempting for wealthier individuals and those wanting to reduce their income tax bill. But remember, HMRC will scrutinise these schemes, and if they deem the scheme to be illegal, which they can do well after you've invested in them, they can prosecute. Obviously, this isn't good luck, but it can also seriously impact you. It almost destroyed Jimmy Carr's career. Don't forget that HMRC can also make you pay back the tax saving that you've saved. So that means a huge tax bill and potentially a career down the pan. There are legitimate schemes such as VCTs, EIS and CDIS that can reduce your tax bills, but they do come with a lot of risk. You're usually required to make a substantial investment into the schemes. They're very expensive to run and invest in very high risk businesses. There's no guarantee that you'll get any of the money back. Of course, there are times when these schemes are suitable later in life when you've got a mortgage-free home, for example, and a solid cash and investment backstop. As Paul mentioned, a key thing to watch out for is investing because they tell you they can get 10, 20, 100% returns. At best, you could get these returns with a lot of luck and a lot of risk. At worst, you could lose all of it. If it sounds too good to be true, then it probably is. So we've talked a lot about investing now instead of waiting until you're close to retirement, but why do we recommend this? So this chart helps illustrate why. Blue shows your investment if you put £200 a month in from age 22 to 65. In total, you pay 105,600 into this pot. Orange shows the investment if you don't start investing until the age of 50, but you still make a total of 105,600 into the pot. It's invested for 15 years as opposed to the 44 years if you'd have started at age 22, and the difference at 65 is 145,000. The grey line really does show the impact of time in the market and cumulative interest. So in the grey line, the whole of the 105,600 is invested at age 22. They don't add anything to this, but by 65, 44 years later, they've got back almost 620,000. The chart's assuming a growth rate of 4% per annum after charges, and obviously stagnant just for the purposes of making this simple, but it basically does really illustrate the power of saving early versus waiting until it's almost too late. So what are the takeaways? So what can you do for yourself today then? Well, to start off with, check your tax codes and make sure HMRC know who you are. Make sure that you're aware of all the tax allowances available to you and make use of them where you can. Say yes to auto-enrolment and don't leave retirement planning until you're almost retired. A little bit of planning now can really, really go a long way. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Helen. I think we've had a couple of questions posted in the chat box, and we'll go through some of these now. So will these slides be made available to us at the end of the session? Yes, we can, I believe. We'll email them over to Rosie, and she can circulate them. Another question, are there any good places online you'd recommend to read more about financial planning? And just a sec. Yeah, there's some good resources available online. For example, the government's money and pension service is very good, and there's some excellent tools, advice on the Prince's Trust website as well. Also, Money Savings Expert is a good source of information, so we'd encourage you to go and check them out. Okay, so I don't think we've got any other questions. I know some of you are booked in for the one-to-one sessions with us next week, and we look forward to talking to you then. Obviously, if you've got any questions for us at that point, you know, we can answer them. But I'll hand back to Rosie or Jane. That's okay.
That's great. Thanks ever so much to all of you. I thought that was really interesting, and you know, not at the beginning of my career by any sense, but I learned a lot there myself. So thank you very, very much. I'm really delighted that everyone's engaged and with the one-to-ones that you're also offering, which is really generous of you as well. And I'm really pleased that they are fully booked, those slots. So it just, as I said at the beginning, really interesting to see that people starting out in careers now, as our students are going to be very shortly, are really interested in making the right choices and the right decisions, and avoiding, hopefully, the wrong decisions. And I thought that was all really interesting. And I learnt all sorts of things about my old student loan, albeit in the past now, but I just completely didn't even think about it at the time, which I think is where our students are right now. So thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem. I think we were talking earlier before the sessions. We were asking each other what was our biggest mistake. I mean, I said it was not joining a pension scheme at age 20. You know, a large part of my 20s, I wasn't a member of a pension scheme, and so if I could go back and do that again, I would make contributions, no matter how small, as Helen shows, that all adds up. So it's important to get into that habit of saving early, having a cash reserve for emergencies, not living beyond your means. So yeah, I'd encourage all the students to do that.
I did just the same, Paul. I didn't do it at the time. I thought, oh, that's so far away, it'll be fine later.
Yeah.
Didn't do it. And of course, when I started, I had to put twice as much in to play catch up. which then became very expensive at the time when, you know, I was going to start a family and that sort of thing, which hit me hard.
Yeah.
But that was my fault, my regret now looking back. But none of this sort of information that we've just had now wasn't available at the time. So I sort of thought I knew what I was doing.
That's it. It's a mystery to everyone, really, isn't it?
Yeah,
Because,
it is.
I think there's a gap, certainly from a kind of financial education point of view, you know, and hopefully that we can do something about that. Yeah. Absolutely.
That's super. Well, thank you once again. Really, really interesting. And I hope all of our students who joined got something out of that. I'm sure you have. So I think I'll probably be saying thank you on behalf of them as well for all of the information you've imparted today. So thanks very much.
Okay,
thank you so much, Paul and team. Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Right.